Well, I think it comes down to a simple choice, really. Get busy living or get busy dying. Now, that famous quote out of a movie, you should know it, there's Red. I'm Andy. Well, I'm Neil, but I'm Andy. Reminded me of the many surveys that governments commissioned over the last 30 years to work out probably the most profoundest value of all. What we, not the cockerel, are worth.
What I'd do this video as we're driving along, because, well, if you get bored listening to me, you can always look at the scenery. Now, as I was saying, what got me interested in this subject was the fact in 2017 the New Zealand government commissioned a survey, another survey after many years, to estimate the value of statistical life. We'll come back to what that means in a bit. And the survey had as a reference statistic, to put people in context of what the level of danger was on roads, the following statistic. This appeared on the survey in many places. It was that the death rate, the number of fatalities on New Zealand roads, was 5.4 fatalities per 100 billion vehicle kilometres. Have a look at that again. Now, would you feel safe?
I certainly wouldn't.
Well, I'm going to take that down. Right, now, the problem was... that was the actual rate. Back then, in 2017, it was 7.2 fatalities per billion vehicle kilometres. There was no 100. If they'd been right, instead of 377 deaths on New Zealand roads in 2018, that's 377 deaths in the year 2018. There'd only been 4. Now, that would have been something to applaud. The road to zero, our Associate Transport Minister is wanting us all to be on. So what is the value of statistical life? Well, it refers to, well, it makes a distinction between statistical lives and identifiable lives. And we can thank a Mr. Schelling in 1968 for this. The life you save, I think it was, may not be your own. It was quite a pivotal article. And he made the difference between an identifiable life, which is, say, a miner trapped in a mine now, or a child in danger, for example, of drowning in the river, and the need to save them now, versus statistical lives. And those people are simply not known. But in the future, their lives may be saved by things like safety belts, tar sealing this road, going slower. Well, I can't go much slower, but wearing a bicycle helmet. I thought I'd stop and do a graph, right, as you do. Right, here we are. So there's the graph. You'll find this in the paper, figure 3, but I'm only going to put the New Zealand on, and in that section you'll see other countries. But here, let's do it. Right here, 30. This is in fatalities. We'll just put F per billion VKM. Fatalities per billion vehicle kilometres. That's this axis. 15, 20. What's that? 7. Right. 1990. 2000. 2016. Right. Well, the bad news. Back when they did the first survey, it was just at 28. 28 fatalities per billion vehicle kilometres. Now, you don't know whether that's a lot or not, but given the fact that's at the top, we can assume it's going to get better. In fact, it halves. By 2000, it's down to 14. So let's put them on. 28, 14, and down here, halved again, 7. Right, doink, doink, doink. Right. Well, we're going up a corner here, so I better be careful. I'm thinking what I'm doing here. This is a nasty corner here. I've reported this one on the council a few times. You can get some pretty scary drivers coming the other way, so you've got to make sure you're on the left side of the road. Right. Now, my good colleague Don Wignall has looked at has used the value of statistical life in some of his appraisals. He did an excellent review of, what was it? I forgot how many they were, but I think there were 24 projects. I think it was 24 projects, total cost of 2.4 billion, and he looked at the share of benefits as well. And he came out with safety only representing 2%. Anyway, the road to zero, that's the government's plan. They're not happy. As I said before, there's about 377 deaths a year. They're looking at 3,000 deaths on the road in the next 10 years. What was the cost of that? Was it 45 billion? 45 billion? And they've worked out the cost using the value of statistical life, which is $4 million. That's the one they're using at the moment. It works out at, I think it works out at 2% of GDP. Busy road here, so I better watch what I'm doing. A very busy road for New Zealand here. Look, this used to be a straight road here, but the council's decided to get this bent, so I've got to stop now. Even though I'm on the straight road, I've got to stop, because this is the main road here. Basically, there's two approaches that have been used. One is the human capital approach, and the second one is the contingent valuation approach. Well, now, back in 1989, they'd used this. The human capital approach is effectively the lost income from premature death. Gurria Miller were commissioned to do a study in 1989-90 by the New Zealand Ministry of Transport, and they came up with a figure of 1.9 million. So that's 10 times higher than that. Bit of traffic. Instead of the government analysts doing this desktop research here, what they do is they go and survey people. Gurria Miller went out and designed a survey. They asked 5 different questions. They asked 650 respondents, and they asked 5 different types of questions, which is a toll road, safe toll. These are all in table 1. Interestingly, discarded half of the responses for reasons such as arithmetic ineptitude. The last question which was about taxes, brought refusals and protest bids of 0. One interviewer labelled the responses unprintable. We'll start. No, we won't. Let's get this one going past. Imagine that you have to travel in a car for a distance of 20 kilometres each weekday for some reason. You can use 2 different routes. One, a high-risk road, and the other, a low-risk road. But before you can travel on the low-risk road, you must pay a toll. Assume the time taken to travel on each road is the same. The toll road will reduce your risk of dying in an accident for each year you travel from 6 in 10,000 to 3 in 10,000. So they've halved it. How much would you pay per one-way trip to use the toll? So over 45% of the responses were treated as valid, and they usually gave one coin response of either 50 cents or $1. And the figure came out in gross terms 2.25 million, and taking into account the other questions, that's how we ended up with that. This is the Wayne Gower, the logging terminal, where logs get taken from the trucks, put onto this rail, onto these flatbed rail wagons, and taken to Wellington to the port and shipped off to China, India and Japan. One of our biggest exports, logs, and they have been in the past a reason for quite a few accidents, log rollovers. Now, back to the subject, table 3, it's in the paper. What I'm going to do is talk about these different countries. As we said, we talked about New Zealand, 4.4 million. Australia's interesting, 2 values. Transport, New South Wales, used a contingent valuation study done by David Henshin about 2007, and he, in terms of New Zealand dollars today, it's 8.3 million. I'll put 8.3 there. And this other study here, when there's talk about now, it's 5.4 million. I better put them in else I'll just forget. So 5.4 million and 8.3. there's a bit of a problem there. As you imagine, for example, a project that's done by, let's say, Dams, Department of Industry. They use this figure here, 5.4 million. But let's say it washes away a road and somebody dies on the road, on the bridge. Use that one, 8.3. Bit of a problem with having two different values, isn't it? Now, this value here, for the Department of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, which is a federal sort of value, was based on a review undertaken by Peter Abelson. So he reviewed a lot of studies of different types and came up with this average here, which I factored up to New Zealand dollars of 5.4 million. And David Hensch's study, which was done by 213 residents of Sydney and Bathurst, undertaken in 2007, his value came out at $6.4 million in Australian dollars, and factoring it up to today, it's 8.3 million. So we can see therefore that in Australia there's two values, one for just about everybody, for all the government departments, of 5.4 million, and then the transport people in New South Wales who got a higher value, so they think people are worth 3 million more than the average Aussie, say in Tasmania or Western Australia. Right, well, number 3, Canada. Well, Canada's a bit of a mystery. Very difficult to find out what the Canadians do. And in fact, doing my research, I got this, has to be anonymous, comment from a researcher. I'll read it out. The Canadian federal government provides little leadership for land transport planning. It occasionally sends provincial and municipal governments a little money, particularly prior to elections, but Transport Canada provides almost no technical support as far as I am aware. There is nothing like the Australian Transport Assessment and Planning, ATAP, the New Zealand Transport Agency Economic Evaluation Manual, the UK Department of Transport's WebTAP, or the US DOT. So how they came by that, 12.5, bit of a mystery. WR doesn't stand for world record because we've got the Americans down here. We'll come to that one at the end. Wage rate review, I think it's come from America. Germans. I like the Germans' approach. Appropriate. Mr. Yona here, he's German, spends most of his time in Germany. Lockdown's a bit of a problem for him. Anyway, Germany, 2 million. Look at that. 2 million, it's half the value of a New Zealander. Germany. Why? Use the human capital approach. Let's see what they got to say about it. They value lost income growth, including the shadow economy, housework and voluntary work, and added humanitarian costs, medical emergency, legal anti-traffic delays, yeah? 2 million! It's getting a bit dark, so I'm going to have to move on at speed here. So let's look at the UK. What have they got? Oh, 3.7 million in New Zealand dollars today. Right, how did they get there? Well, unlike the Germans, they have quite a complicated approach to life. The Anglo-Saxons, they've been studying it for years. In fact, as long as New Zealand. Probably the first to study it, Jones Lee, who was my lecturer at Newcastle University when I did my undergraduate degree. Very smart individual. But one of the studies that they did, I'll just read out what they said. It was a type of study like the one I mentioned against Jagida Guria. A review by Dalby in 1988 pointed out that many respondents misunderstood the base risk. And the researcher, Jones Lee, agreed, remarking that a third of respondents had the same willingness to pay for 2 different risk changes, and some even had a lower willingness to pay for bigger risk reductions. So basically, they didn't understand the questionnaire, did they? So, but what we've ended up with is 3.7 million for the UK. I don't know whether that includes the Scots. They're quite separate these days, so they've probably got their own value. But the English and the Welsh, 3.7 million. Ah, the Swedes, the Bjorn Borgs of Value of Statistical Life. Yes, well, they did roughly the same sort of studies as New Zealand and the UK. Reason, same individuals, generally speaking, involved. You find Miller, Gurria Miller, no, this was Miller, Ted Miller, I think it was, an American who helped co-design the New Zealand survey with Gurria. And he praised the pre-testing and representing sampling, but criticised the description of risk levels. They use graph paper. Remember Jones Lee telling me about this? Got a piece of graph paper, 100,000 squares on it, and they shaded a few in to represent the risk. But Miller said, giving a response that sounds reasonable in order to satisfy the interviewer rather than express uncertainty. Ah dear. Well, with the sun setting, we've saved the best to last, or should I say the biggest to last. Guess who's got the biggest? Think they're the most expensive people in the world. Who do you think it is? It's the Americans. The WR, 15.1 million New Zealand dollars each one of them. And when I was talking to some people in Transport for New South Wales, that inspired them. They said, well, we need a higher value as well. They want to be up there with the Americans. So how did they get there? Well, believe it or not, it's based on wage rate studies. Yes, wage rate studies and risk. So you relate the risk to the wage rate, and the jobs with the highest risk minus agriculture. They don't put agriculture in because that ruins it. That brings the average down, so they delete agriculture. So everything apart from agriculture and forestry gets put in. Higher the risk, bigger the salary, ends up with 15.1 based on a review of studies. There was 15 studies reviewed most recently. They got rid of 6, they kept 9, took the average, $15.1 million. That's how they get there. What did we find out yesterday? Let's recap on yesterday. What we had was the good news, which was a big reduction in fatalities on New Zealand roads, 4-fold reduction since the 1990s, and we had a massively increased value of statistical life, which has gone up 12-fold, I think, for New Zealand in nominal terms. So that's what we had. Right, let's graph those two things and see what we get. Right, here we are, one I prepared earlier, figure 4 in the article. So on this axis here, we got fatalities per billion BKM. And on this one here, we got the value of statistical life, dollars, NZ, million, 15, and 5. Now, in the graph, it's got lots of other dots. It's got all the overseas comparisons. You'll have to look at the article for that. But in general terms, the line that I fitted was round about there to there, and it was a curve, and it did that. So, believe it or not, when the fatalities per billion vehicle kilometre are high, the value of statistical life is low, whereas when the roads are very safe, the value of statistical life is very high. So this is completely contrary to what Jones-Lee said it should be if you're doing these type of surveys. The line, in fact, should go like that. Oh, so we're going up Admiral Hill. This is used for cycle rides. The tour of the Wairarapa. Some Australians come over and they've won the race. Now, both New Zealand and Australia currently re-estimating the value of statistical life with value of time, I think, as well, in quite complicated surveys. But as we've seen, it's not easy to do, given the ability of us humans to relate to small probabilities. I don't think they're going to fare much better than in the past. So, an overview, and what a view. So, has knowing the value of statistical life made our roads safer? I'd argue, probably no. In fact, I like the sanguine German approach, the human capital approach, the $2 million. Relatively low, but they still got their 130k plus autobahns, and their fatality rate has decreased pretty rapidly. Improved safety can and often involves trade-offs, such as lower speeds, less convenience, bicycle helmets for example, picky policing, that's just naming 3. So, as William Munny said, we've all got it coming. So the key is to maximise the value of the life you're living. So what did Andy decide to do? Well, Andy decided to risk it all to escape the safe confines of Shawshank and drive down to an unpronounceable beach resort in Mexico. So, do you know the name of the 2 films? Well, I'd forgive you for forgetting William, but you're beyond redemption if you've forgotten Andy. William was wrong anyway. Reserve's got everything to do with it. I'm having a beer.